from the Ticats Audio Network, this is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
Looking for a leader in the nation's capital. Who are the real beasts of the East? The Rough Riders crossover hopes appear rocky to say the least, and for the first time we examine the excellence of officiating. These topics and much more are up next as the CFL This Week starts right now on the Ticats Audio Network. Welcome to this week's podcast. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil, and I'm joined by three fine fellas on our panel. As the host of Good Morning Hamilton and the fifth quarter, he is the first person in and the first person out at CHML 900. Welcome, Rick Zamperin.
Hello, Bubba.
He too is a morning man in Edmonton and is the sound of the Elks on 630 CHED. Thanks for joining us, Morley Scott.
Hey, hi guys.
And this former player is now a member of the media wing at the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Congratulations. And in addition, he's the lead analyst on the CFL on TSN. Glen Suter, always a pleasure.
Nice to be here.
All right, guys, let's get to business. You know what? I'll start with you, Morley. You know what? After a loss to the Lions, the Redblacks fire Paul LaPolice. Now, Bob Dice is kind of the guy, the interim guy, they're calling him that. And I don't think he's going to be really the long-term solution. We may not know that. But why do you think the move was made right now?
Yeah, it's kind of curious to me. I thought with so few games left, they might just ride it out. Might be because goodness knows in the East Division, you always have a chance if you can get on a run. So maybe they're hoping they get some kind of spark with the coaching change and possibly get on some sort of run, although I don't see that happening, although they do have a couple of games with Hamilton right at the end of the year. So that's the team they got to catch. And of course, they got to worry about Saskatchewan on the other side as well, and maybe the Elks. But yeah, it's interesting. Maybe they also want to get the message out to all those coordinators who are out there and thinking about making a move that, hey, we got an opening here, so remember to get your resume together for when the season ends. So that's kind of my take on it.
What do you think, Rick?
I think it's twofold. Number one, it gives them, an extra month, so to speak, to eye who the next guy is going to be. Although, they could have done that with Paul LaPolice still at his position. I think it also puts the players on notice to say, listen, this season wasn't good enough. We have to be better. And we're committed to making this change at the top to make this team better. So I think it really puts some of the spotlight on the players to say, we need, better execution on the field. The effort is there at times, but they're not seeing that in, points on the board or, points defended against defensively. And, at the end of the day, I think this is all part of Sean Burke, the general manager, putting his fingerprints or more of his fingerprints on the franchise. So I think giving him a little more lead time to make this decision, I think is why Lapo was let go at this point in time.
Glenn, there's some that say that, it really doesn't matter what was done to this point, and that, putting a Band-Aid on it for the last 3 or 4 games of the regular season wasn't the answer. Do you agree with that?
No, I think I'm actually a little surprised it took this long, to be quite honest, based on, it's a result-oriented business. The results weren't there over the last couple of years. There's the excuse of the quarterback situation in Ottawa. I really think that's an excuse. I mean, Paul LaPolice is a former colleague and friend of mine, so this is quite difficult, but it's just the way of the world. I mean, it's the way of pro sports and pro football. Now, I, for one, do not believe in making a change as long as you're in playoff contention. And when I say contention, I don't mean mathematically still involved. I mean playoff contention. Then you don't change your coach, even if you're struggling. But because I've never seen that work. I've never seen, a team completely switch around and change and become that much better because of the coaching change in midseason. But once you're basically eliminated from the playoffs, and let's be honest, Ottawa basically is eliminated, you can start building and working on next year. And that's why I'm not surprised by it. I'm not surprised by the timing of it. And they are trying to now get an advantage on the other teams in the East for next season.
Guys, it's interesting that Glenn, I think Glenn brings up a great point of the fact that it wasn't done earlier, Rick. Ottawa seemed to have had their struggles. Was the Masoli injury really sort of the excuse, if you want to use that, to give Lapo maybe some extra time?
I think it was certainly a big domino. I mean, any team that loses its franchise quarterback is going to, feel some pain. I'm not sure we expected that much pain and suffering for Redblacks fans. Let's face it, they just have not been good enough here in 2022. And I think, that kind of set the wheels in motion to, for a season that really has not gone according to plan. My expectation, I think really around the league, a lot of people were expecting this team to be a little better. How much better? There were different ways to measure that. Certainly, I didn't expect them to be a 3-win team in 2022, and they might stay at that number. Who knows? At the end of the day, they need better players on the fields. They need, a head coach that can make those players play at an optimum level. And when things don't go right, they can right the ship, a week later, not let losing streaks go to 3, 4, 5 games, which, is going to drop you out of the playoff spot. Whether this coaching change would have been made sooner and we would have seen different results, we're never going to know. I doubt it, because the players on the field, whether they were going to respond in a positive way to a coaching change, say around Labor Day, maybe even earlier, I don't know. At the end of the day, this team has been in an offensive rut for a while now. They've certainly relied on Lewis Ward to, tack on the points here and there. Their defense has been okay at times, but again, just not good enough in all three phases of the game, week in and week out. We can see some flashes here and there, but consistently have not been good enough.
Morley, I'll come back to you for the last thought on this one too. And Sean Burke at the beginning of the year, the general manager, said we have a high expectation for this club and that we're going to make the playoffs. And he said that in many interviews. Was that kind of the, just maybe a dream based on the talent on this team?
Well, I think every GM says that, right? We got high expectations for our club going in. I think everybody had certainly higher expectations than 3 wins for the Ottawa Redblacks, and it just all fell apart. It started with the Masoli injury, and they couldn't find a way to recover from it, in my mind, and it just snowballed from there. They're just not good enough. A lot of people thought they'd be a lot better, so I think in that way they've really underproduced this year, and I think Burke's realized, we gotta right the ship, and quickly. They got an angry fan base there, I believe, as well. They, like the Elks, haven't won at home in a long time. Their only win at home has been over Edmonton in the last 2 years, I believe. So, they're an angry fan base, and I think that you kind of can at least make them a little happier by making changes and make sure that they know that you're making changes to try and get better. So that's my take. Yeah.
Morley, you kind of talked about it there. You lead right into it. Following that record-breaking 15th loss at home. There was a great discussion, I thought, on the TSN panel discussing, should Elks head coach Chris Jones sort of be happy with the status quo and saying that, we are improving as a football team. And as Milt Stiegel would say, this is just not good enough. So which side do you think Chris Jones is battling on right now?
Well, show me a coach who's happy after a loss, and I'll show you a coach who's not committed enough, right? I mean, Chris Jones knows things are improving, but he wants to win football games. He wants to win them now. And I think what's frustrating him more than anything else is the way they're losing now and the way that game went down. To get into the 5-yard line twice in the fourth quarter and come away -8 in points in that stretch is incredible in a game that was there for the taking. I mean, the 8 points they gave up on the pick six with the 2-point convert, those are the deciding points in the football game. I mean, they had a chance to increase their lead. They had a chance to put their foot on the gas pedal and put the last nail in the coffin. And instead, they couldn't get in from the 5-yard line, not once, but twice. They got there, and it was the pick six. It was not being able to jam it in from 2 yards in on 3 attempts. The game was there to be won. And there's been a few games like that this year, and I think it's starting to frustrate the coach a lot because there's probably in his mind been more progress than the standings would show, but they're not getting wins. And as Jones often says to us in media scrums, it's pro football. It's about winning. It's not about getting better. There's no consolation prize for coming close. And I think that's what's frustrating him more than anything is that fact that they are so close and they feel like they're for the last month to 6 weeks, they've been a different team. They've been exciting. There's been big plays. They've been doing things the right way, but they're still shooting themselves in the foot every game and doing something that's costing them the game. And I think that's what's frustrating him more than anything else.
Glenn, these are your boys, actually. I mean, are you with Stiegel saying that they're not good enough, or are you with Ches kind of saying that, hey, there's signs to be happy?
Yeah, when you're building a college program or something, you can have a year like that where you're building and you're progressing. Obviously, you want to be improving no matter what team you are. I mean, the Bombers want to be improving every day and every week. That's the goal. But if you're not winning, you are what your record says you are. And it really doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And, there's some things that Coach Jones can sort of, take accountability for. And that would be, all the changes that he has made throughout the season and just trying to find the right combination and the right lineup has, probably cost him some games, just straight lack of chemistry that is so important in football, especially with O-line and DBs. Those two position groups have got to play together. They've got to be on the same page. And with all the changes he made throughout the season, that was very difficult to come by. So yeah, you are what your record says you are. That's the bottom line.
Ricky?
Yeah, I mean, this is a 4-11 team. And it's a process, right? Like building a winning football structure in some cases takes some time. And this is going to take some time. It may not happen next year either. Let's hope they win a home game for the first time in a long time. But, this also, when you have a record like this, and you're close, it might entice, a key free agent here and there, like we've seen with Terrell Walker, to say, you know what, Edmonton's a great football town. Let's go try and win some games with the Elks. It might entice the next crop of free agents to look at Edmonton because of, the culture Chris Jones is trying to employ and the success he's had in the past, which obviously goes a long way in attracting guys. But at the end of the day, it is, as I said, a process. And sometimes you are close for many games during a season, and many times you're not. And to be happy when you're not, I haven't met a head coach who has ever been happy with a loss. And sometimes they're not happy when they win because of the way they performed on the field. But at the end of the day, it is, as Glenn said, a results-oriented business. Without the wins, that process continues. Sometimes it's slower for some teams compared to others.
Morley, what's the climate right in Edmonton right now with the fan base? I thought when they brought in Chris Jones, I mean, he was a high-priced guy that has had much success in Saskatchewan, Edmonton, anywhere he's gone, quite honestly. Are fans being patient right now? They're used to such a winning tradition in Edmonton. What's the climate like right now with the Eskimos Nation, if I'll call it that?
Yeah, it's a little. They're trying to be positive. They're trying to hang in there, but it's been a tough 5 years for this fan base. I mean, they haven't had a home playoff game since 2015, the year they won the Grey Cup, and they haven't had very many winning seasons in the last 3 or 4 either. I mean, and last year they won 3 games. This year they've got 4 now with 3 games to go, so they're still not going to have a good season. Not going to be anywhere near a 500 team, and not going to make the playoffs. So they're trying to be patient. I think the educated fan sees the improvement. And I mean, for me, being around the team, if you compare last year's team to this year's team, at the end of last year, with a team that didn't play very well at all, to where they are now, about the same record, but I feel a little bit more confident about the team moving forward into next year because I think they have more of the pieces in place that they need. And they've added some guys, especially offensively, in the last month, in Kevin Brown at running back and Dylan Mitchell at receiver and Christian Salisbury returning the football. Now, they've got some pieces in place that will make them a better team and already has made them a better team. They just got to learn to win. They got to finish. That's the key word that they've talked about a lot here is finish. And they haven't been able to finish a lot of games this year that they should have won and could have won. The fan base, I think, to a certain extent understands that. but still they haven't seen a home win in 3 years, right? It's been 2019, obviously the pandemic years in there as well, but still it's been too long, way too long. And, even on Saturday, it's a beautiful day here. It was like 22 degrees, 23 degrees at kickoff, and the sun was shining. There's 24,000, second biggest crowd of the year in attendance. So to that extent, they're there, but they're on the fence right now, very much on the fence. And I think they need to show some improvement to win a few more fans back over to the right side.
Glenn, there may be no more polarizing football executive in the CFL than Chris Jones. I mean, it is amazing to me across the nation how many people seem to really like this guy, and some people that have their differences with Chris Jones. Is he the guy to turn this program around, Glenn?
I think he can be, and the patience approach has worked. It worked in Winnipeg. It worked in Winnipeg with Michael O'Shea. In his first couple of years, the record wasn't there, but he was building the culture. And the one thing that I don't think people know enough about is Chris Jones and his relationship with the players. They love playing for Chris Jones. They really do. And, he learned a lot of how he approaches the game from Don Matthews, the late Don Matthews. And I played for Don Matthews, and I know that, from the outside, and sometimes the way he was in the media or the way that he looked from the outside looking in, there was often, some criticism and, judgment that he wasn't the PR guy that they wanted and all that. But in our room, you just absolutely respected and loved playing for Don Matthews. So I think Chris Jones has a lot of that. And that's a way you can build the culture in a locker room. So the patience approach has worked in the past. And Morley, it's interesting to hear you talk about the fan base, that the knowledgeable fan base in Edmonton, and they are knowledgeable there. They've had great winning seasons and great tradition, so they know what that feels like. And if they're patient and give them a chance, but it won't be long into next year. If they go 0-3 at home to start the season next year, I don't know if Chris Jones.
Please, no mas.
Oh, gosh. Hey, Ticat fans, it is time to ride on our strength. From now until October 13th, purchase 4 eligible Hercules passenger or light truck tires to receive a $100 Ticats reward card and be entered to win our road trip sweepstakes. Available at participating Active Green and Ross, Ontario locations, or visit HerculesTires.com/AGR rewards. Rick, to you. Simple question. Who are the beasts of the East? Alouettes or the Argonauts as we stand right now?
Oh, geez. Do I have to pick one of these two? I
Yes.
guess so. Okay. Well, let's look at some statistics. The Argos are number 1 in the division. They have one more win than Montreal. The Argos have beaten Montreal in their only head-to-head. I think that was week 1 or week 2, and it was 20-19. But Toronto has not beaten a team with a winning record. And Montreal has. They've beaten Winnipeg and they've beaten BC. So to me, and Montreal's won 3 in a row. The Argos coming off a brutal loss against Calgary. If I'm riding one of these teams to the East final and maybe a Grey Cup berth, it's probably Montreal, to be honest. They've been way more consistent. Even in the games they've lost, they've been more consistent than Toronto has. Montreal's defense, I'm a big fan of. They've always had good special teams, and this year it's no exception. And offensively, Trevor Harris can be up and down. He's been more up than down, I think, for the better part of this season. Gino Lewis is just badass. I mean, he can catch everything thrown his way and scores touchdowns after catching the football. Right now, I'm on the Montreal bandwagon to win the East. They're the beasts of the East. I think they might represent the East in the Grey Cup.
Glenn, there could be some that say that Danny Machocha could be in line for maybe a Coach of the Year candidacy. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, if they keep up the winning and they beat the Argos to first place in the division and host a playoff game, and all of that would bode well in that regard. But I start with the quarterback position. And with these two teams in comparing them, because both have strengths. I mean, I love the Argos' physicality. I love how physical they play. Now with Shane Ray getting hurt, with Wynton McManus getting hurt, and we're not sure how severe those injuries are yet. That's a big hit to their defense in a huge way. Those are two key players. So we'll see what happens there. The Alouettes get William Stanback. He's close to returning, so that's a big one for them too. But if you just go at the quarterback position, I give the edge to Montreal, and I do it because I think McLeod Bethel-Thompson is right at that moment where he has got to prove it or they got to move on. I think he has been good enough to a point to really tease people that love the Argos, but has not gone past that threshold and just won those really tough games to win. I'm still not a believer completely. And I think Trevor Harris gives Montreal a better chance.
Morley, I don't think the Argonauts and Elks have played each other, but I'm sure you've seen plenty of them on the tube. Your thoughts between these two teams for top spot in the East?
It's funny. I was just thinking last time I was on the show, the same question came up. Who's the best team in the East? At that time, I said, let's be honest, it's whoever finishes fourth in the West. But right now, I don't think that's the case anymore. And I got to go with Montreal. As I said, as you said, the Elks haven't played Toronto yet, but I've seen them play. They didn't look very good in the game against Calgary. Montreal, they just came off a homestand where they won 3 of 4. They go on the road. They win in Edmonton. Their defense is strong. It held the Elks to 18 points and scored 6 points to win the game as well. I just think Montreal's got a few more pieces in place, playing better right now. The recent sampling of the two teams leads me to say Montreal. And Trevor Harris, when he gets hot, he's pretty hard to stop. I know we saw that great performance he had for Edmonton in Montreal in the Eastern Final a couple of years ago. He was pretty solid on Saturday night. Didn't complete a lot of passes, but he was still up around 80%. And, he can find the tight windows, and he's got a good group of receivers. And I think you got to give the go-ahead and the nod right now to Montreal over Toronto as being the best team in the East, especially when you look at the way they've played in the recent couple of weeks.
And they beat Winnipeg, Bubba. That's the top team in the league, and they're one of the few teams that can say in the last couple of years we beat Winnipeg,
and did so. They stood right with them for 4 quarters in that contest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and that's the ultimate respect for such a well-coached, strong, balanced football team in the Winnipeg Blue Bombers with the MOP at quarterback right now, and they beat them.
Rick, can I just flip the coin there on something that Glenn said there about McLeod Bethel-Thompson? Are you a believer?
No, not wholeheartedly. If I need him to win a game, maybe. If the Argos are going to the Grey Cup, whoever they're facing, I'm thinking, man, McLeod's got to play his best game, and in each and every of these big games, we get a good first half or we get a good second half. We don't get a complete game when the chips are down week in and week out. As Glenn said, we get teased. The talent is there. The progression's there at some point. He can escape in the pocket when he's being flushed out. Find the guy downfield. And then, a few series later, it's like the Argos haven't moved the ball. They haven't got a first down. Their offense is it's so frustrating and can be so frustrating, I would imagine, for an Argos fan, because you see the talent there. It just does not materialize, at least for a whole game or a few games in a row. And I think that's incredibly frustrating. So I would vote no. I'm not a 100% believer in McLeod Bethel-Thompson.
Morley, your thoughts on Macbeth?
He puts up numbers, and to me, that's the bit of the tease. He puts up numbers, but he doesn't win enough games to make me a big believer in him. If you're talking just in the East, if it comes down to Toronto against Ottawa, I'd put my money on Trevor Harris before I put it on McLeod Bethel-Thompson. But he puts up numbers, and I think he's got that any given day in him that he can come out and put up 400 yards and lead a team to a win. But he doesn't do it on continuously. He doesn't do it on a regular basis. And you get a couple of really good games, and you get a couple of games that aren't so good, and then he's back to throwing for 300 plus yards. And I just don't think that he's as good as the other quarterbacks, especially in the West, if he gets to the Grey Cup. I don't think Toronto's going to have the best quarterback in the game in any playoff game they play this year.
Glenn, time to pull at your emotions and your heartstrings. I don't know what happened to the Riders in the fourth quarter in this last week's game against the Bombers, but it wasn't good. With games against Hamilton, BC, 2 versus Calgary, are the Riders really in? Could this happen that they will remain stuck on 6 wins and not even be a crossover team?
No, I think that probably the magic number there is 2, and if they can win 2 of those games, they're in. And the next one, this one coming up, as you guys know, is the big game. I mean, Hamilton, they can basically decide and eliminate one or the other from that final spot in the East. So, I think there are enough pieces. I really do. They are snake bit against Winnipeg. I think it's become mental. They find ways they stay close for 3 quarters against the Bombers, and then it seems like Zach Collaro says, "Okay, that's enough of this," and then goes to work, and there's 2 touchdowns before you know it, and it's game over. So, I think that's one they got to exercise that mental demon, but. Beyond that, they get their O-line back intact now. They're getting the receiving core back intact, the top to bottom, including Duke Williams returning. Hasn't had a great season, but he's capable of a great game. So that's going to help them. And I still think Cody Fajardo can win. I really do. I think if he's healthy enough to run and use that part of his game, he's good enough to win.
But that offensive line, it looked like Dan Clark seemed to come back, which obviously is going to help them at that center position. And then it seemed like he seemed to leave injured once again. There's got to be some question there, because it appears to me that if his offensive line is not working, I guess you could say this about any quarterback, that Cody just can't seem to get the job done.
Yeah, and I think it's partly play calling. I remember talking years ago to John Hufnagel when he was actually coaching the Calgary Stampeders. And their O-line had taken some injuries. They had lost 3 of the 5. And I asked him, I said, "What's the concern here?" And he said, "No, you can play call around an O-line that's struggling. You just have to call different types of plays and go to a different part of his playbook." I always remember that, because I've heard many times when we all analyze a team that's struggling offensively and say, well, their O-line is in trouble because of injuries and their quarterback has no time and it's their fault. And then I always think of Hufnagel's comment in the back of my mind saying, you can play call around a struggling O-line.
Elk, as the guy that calls the Elks games there, what are your thoughts about Saskatchewan there? I thought that they were in line to host a Grey Cup and be a West representative. What are your thoughts there?
Especially when they started 4-1, right? They built themselves a nice cushion that they're pretty happy they had in place going into the backstretch of the season here. When I watch Saskatchewan, I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't know what it is, but whenever I watch Saskatchewan, it's just like something's missing. Something's just not right with that team. There's been a lot of noise around that team this year, whether it be, the suspensions or the fans getting on the coach, the fans getting on the quarterback, hosting the grid. There's just been a lot of noise around that team, and they haven't seemed to respond to it very well for whatever reason. And I just, every time I watch them, I can't put my finger on it, but it just feels like something's missing from that Riders team this year. And I don't think they can recover. This week's game, obviously in Hamilton, is going to be the key game for the season for both clubs. And I think if Hamilton wins it, I can see there being no crossover this year. The Tiger Cats have a couple with Ottawa right at the end of the year. So the path is certainly a little bit easier for them moving forward than it is for the Riders. If they win the game Friday, or is it Friday? Yeah, if they win the game Friday, they're obviously in the driver's seat. But can they finish the deal? Can they get to the finish line and stay in that crossover spot? But as I said, they just don't look right to me. There's just something missing, something wrong with that team this year. And I don't know if it's from the coaching staff or from the players or whatever the mix is. It just doesn't seem to be right now.
Rick, it's fun because the Riders just, you're questioning their momentum going into this game. And you're looking at Hamilton, and even though they played that spectacular game-breaking, season-breaking game against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and I thought they looked really good, pretty good in a loss to Montreal in Montreal. I feel like they're in a better headspace right now than Saskatchewan players seem to be right now.
Yeah, for me, when I think of the Rough Riders this year, the word underachieving comes to mind because I thought they'd be much better than what the record suggests. Mind you, they've had some games where they've lost, and I thought, man, they should have won that game. I think of the two Argos games where I think they could have won both, to be honest with you. They just have not, as Morley mentioned, something's amiss in Saskatchewan. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I think that's maybe, the big question mark, because we all know this team can have a few more wins in that column and can play a lot better, but we just don't know, a play here or there that went different. Obviously this season could be a lot different, but to me, I thought this team was going to be, encroaching 10, 11 wins. They have a lot of talent on the field on all sides of the football, but it just something's awry in Saskatchewan. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Well, hey, gentlemen, the record was excellent, and then they played Ottawa, and I'm not blaming him completely, and then Garrett Marino's hit on Jeremiah Masoli, and all that happened since then, that locker room cannot have been together. It just doesn't, we don't know unless we're actually in it for sure, and the players would only know that. But it just seems to me from the outside looking in, that was the turning point to where the locker room was probably divided.
But then, Glenn, I'll come right back at you. Isn't that not the responsibility, I guess, of the team, but also the head coach to maintain, because discipline has definitely been an issue with that football team? Yeah,
it has. And that doesn't, guys like Duke Williams, who had his suspension for just silly stuff, just stuff that is really selfish decisions on the field. And the coach is responsible, not necessarily in-house during the year, because you have to have the leadership in the room where the players will basically self-govern. They're not going to wait for someone, above them to tell them that taking stupid penalties is going to get you beat. You have to be able to do that in the house. But the responsibility on the coach, bringing the players in that are going to cross that line too often. Everybody might at now and then in their career have that moment. But if you have a guy who's continually doing it and you keep him in the room the entire time and you don't make a change there, half the locker room, I guarantee you, is saying, why is he still here? He keeps costing us games. And half of them are saying, we love this guy. He's a warrior. So when you have that problem in your locker room, you're in trouble. Again, you don't know unless you're in it. But since Garrett Marino, that's been a different team.
Morley, last one to you on this is that a lot of times in situations like this, especially when you host a Grey Cup and you come up and underperform the way it appears that they have done, there's a good examination and evaluation of everyone, players, executives, that someone, and I just keep hearing from a lot of people that the problems are at the top. And I guess that will be general manager. Do you see that? Is that your feeling with this football club?
Well, I think leadership comes from the top. And I think that, as Glenn kind of alluded to, they didn't really take a stand as a franchise with Garrett Marino early enough. I don't think they waited too long, and they waited until the backlash was too high. I don't see, someone's probably going to lose their job over this. I don't know if it'll be the GM or not. It might be the head coach, but I can't see them finishing this season the way they did and going into next season with the same leadership group in the dressing room and the same coaching staff. I think there's going to be some changes in Saskatchewan. It might be at quarterback, it might be at coach, it might be at GM. It just might be amongst the leadership of the Riders. But if they don't make the playoffs, there's, especially after the start they had and then how things went south on them so quickly, I think there'll obviously be some big changes going in. And it's tough. We had that in Edmonton in 2018, didn't make the playoffs in a year they're hosting the Grey Cup. It's not fun. It's not fun for an organization. It's kind of embarrassing. And nobody wants to go through that. And, the Riders obviously had big hopes for this season, especially after the start. And now they're just hanging on by a thread right now.
Hey, Rick, the Tiger Cats were under that pressure, just last year. And even though their season wasn't as good as the 2019 season, they actually appeared, and certainly some would say suggest that they had their opportunities at winning that game. But I think that sort of helped out the organization in sort of an opposite way of thinking for the Tiger Cats.
Yeah, they certainly, had their ups and downs last year in the COVID shortened season in which they played 4 fewer games than they usually do. But, I think when the chips were down, especially come playoff time, having back-to-back 2 really, intense inter-division playoff games, especially the East Final, in which their first half was basically a write-off. Dane comes in, has a tremendous second half, and they go out and beat the Argos at BMO Field, and took Winnipeg to overtime this time. At least Ticats fans could take some solace in the fact that they were a little bit closer than the year before. But at the end of the day, just coming back to Saskatchewan, they're on the bye week, I think, after this game, and so really this, in essence, is their Grey Cup before the actual Grey Cup. If they don't win this game, I think they're in a world of hurt, and I think the Ticats can ultimately grab that final playoff spot. I think a lot of the pressure is on this Saskatchewan team on the road, huge game, bye week coming up, back to back against Calgary to end the season. This is it. They got to be all in on this one.
Folks, before we get to our last juicy topic, because I love this one so much, listeners, you could win a trip to the Ticats October 29th away game in Ottawa with Journey Rewards. Simply hit ticats.ca/journey-rewards to enter to win 2 tickets on Via Rail, hotel and game tickets, plus a chance at other prizes, including an autographed Ticats jersey or a $250 gift card to the Ticats shop. Go on the road with the Ticats to Ottawa with Journey Rewards. Rick, you get the first shot at this one. And I don't think we have talked about this all season long, but it bears discussion. Your thoughts on the officiating in the Canadian Football League. And there's an individual that I'm shocked. I listened to all the Morley, Glen, I listened to all you guys on internet radio. And at some point or other, the word or name Andre Proulx keeps coming up. We don't maybe need to center on him, Rick, but your thoughts on the officiating in 2022.
Well, it's a name that is slowly but surely challenging Jake Ireland, who was mentioned. I've lost count over the years on the 5th quarter and how many times that name was brought up because Ticats fans were PO'd on some call or non-call or replay that should have gone their way or penalty that should or shouldn't have been called. I used to be a referee in soccer, and it is the most thankless job on the planet because no matter who wins and who loses, 8 times, 9 times out of 10, it's the referee's fault. The referee didn't make a call or made a blunder or whatnot. And this is why we're losing young referees in virtually every sport. I know why they don't. They don't want to be exposed to this kind of pressure from coaches and players and fans and parents and everybody else in between. But at the end of the day, the answer to this question is yes, the CFL needs better officiating because ultimately it will lead to a better product on the field. And not necessarily just to make the fans happy that their team has won or lost, but I think when you don't realize there's referees on the field, even though we know they're there, it just lends to a much smoother game, a much more enjoyable entertainment product. At the end of the day, that's what football is. I think as a viewer, whether you're in the stadium or you're at home watching on TV or listening to it on the radio, it's just that much more enjoyable because there's not those starts and stops. There's not those controversial moments when they're getting it right. What the answer is to get to that point, I'm not sure, other than bringing in a new crop of referees from the collegiate level, the U Sports level, and make sure that they're better than the previous crop. It's extremely hard to do, being in that game for many years. But hey, I wish the CFL the best of luck.
Glenn, one of the games you did this weekend was the BC Lions and the Ottawa game. And the game was sort of not really, I guess it was in question somewhat going, I believe, the 3rd quarter. And there was a misconduct foul, which I kind of thought was ticky-tack that continued to drive inside the score zone. I think brought BC to the 5-yard line, and they scored on the very next play. And some would suggest that the misconduct call was pretty ticky-tack as it was a push for a push. And it was called by Andre Proulx. Your thoughts? I don't know if you remember that exact play or that situation. Your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I do. The last couple of weeks, there's been games where I basically said on the broadcast that I felt the officials just had bad games, and they're human too, so they will have bad games, like the players, like the coaches, like broadcasters. But I think, first of all, to Rick's point, that it's such a difficult job. I think the Canadian Football League and some of our kicking rules makes it that much more difficult than maybe any sport on the planet to officiate. And I think our guys are good officials. I really do. My concern with it is this narrative in the offseason that we needed to improve game flow, and that game flow was somehow tied to the Canadian ratio, was the narrative that I heard throughout the offseason from the league office and a lot of other people. And that has nothing to do, neither does the hash marks on game flow. Game flow is tied directly to officiating. And if you have 25 penalties in a game, you have zero game flow. So it's a combined responsibility of the teams, the rules committee, and the approach. And, to be part of the solution rather than just, always complaining about officiating, I think we have to allocate, the league office has to allocate twice the money to officiating, not because it'll make the current guys better, because if that's the case, then they've been holding out on us, and that's not right. But it's to give them more resources, allow the head officials to actually do it as their primary job, possibly. If we could get to that, think of the competition that would be created from a whole bunch of graduating youth sport football players, men and women, who would then say, this could be my career to stay in football as an official. And in those new recruitment camps, rather than have 20 guys of potential new officials, maybe you have 100. So I think that would take time. And in the short term, again, part of the solution, not part of just complaining about it. I just want to look at the approach. If an official throws a flag, he has changed the game, and you better have a penalty. The ticky-tack problem has got to go away. Let the men on the field who are, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way to officials, I mean it that these guys are playing for their livelihoods. Let them decide the outcome of a play. If they cheat to a point where you have to throw your flag, then throw it. But if you're looking and you're saying, well, within the rule book, and if I interpret it a certain way, that one could have been a penalty, so I am throwing my flag. No, none of that ticky-tack stuff, because that affects game flow and the presentation of the product. So that, I know that was a long rant, but
no.
I think they're great. I think we need to change the philosophy and allocate more refund or resources.
Morley, it's funny because I look at the box scores of all games, and I know I've seen it with the Elks. I've seen it with the Ticats. Sometimes 13 penalties, 17 penalties, and I've got to we talk about and we talk about pace of the game, and I can't believe sometimes that of those 13 or 15 or 17 flags that were thrown, and many of them accepted, that that's just the way to go. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's come to the point, when I'm doing a game, and there'll be a great play, and whether it's a great offensive play with a catch or a great defensive play with a knockdown, it's before you get too excited about it, you gotta look at the field to see if there's any flags up, because you want to make sure it's actually a play. And it just happens too much. And Glen hit the nail on the head. I think the ticky-tacky calls have to go. It really has hit me this season watching NFL games this year. I kind of took note of it a little bit. The biggest difference you see when you're watching an NFL game with the flow is they don't call as many penalties, not near as many penalties. You can see a play, a ball goes into the end zone, and there's a receiver and a DB fighting over, doing the hand fighting and getting into position and everything. And it's caught or it's not caught, but there's no flag. And you go, CFL, there'd be flags all over the place for that call. And that's exactly what Glen was talking about. Let the guys decide. And if a guy grabs a guy and pulls his arm away from making a catch, then you got to call it. But if they're just playing rock, paper, scissors as they go down the field, I mean, you got to stop calling those little ticky-tacky things. And I think that's the issue. And as far as, you brought up Andre Proulx, First off, Andre Prue is great radio. I love it when he referees games that we're doing, because when he turns the mic on, it's absolutely gold. But he's not the only guy throwing flags out there, right? The other officials are throwing flags too. It's not just on one guy. And the officiating has to be better in the CFL. But it's not just Andre Prue or Al Bradbury or whoever you want to point to. Everybody's got to get better, and they have to improve. And the CFL, to me, it's on the CFL to find a way to improve it. And again, Glen said it, more resources, better training, give the guy a chance instead of throwing, reffing games on a Friday and a Saturday and then going to his normal job on Monday and then going back. Give him a chance to go to the office and watch the film and look at it and study it and talk to someone and say, hey, what could I have done better here? Have someone in place at the league office that can actually help these guys, coach them and instruct them on how they want the game to be refereed, and say, yeah, you probably didn't need to throw one there. You should have thrown one there, whatever the case may be. And I don't know how much instruction and how much help the officials get, but it seems to me they're all working 40 hours a week as well. So there's not enough time in their lives to probably put that work into studying film and to getting better. I'm sure some do to a certain extent, but they got to have more time.
Rick, but based on a 9-team league and the finances of the league, is this realistic, you think? To be able to do that?
I think the league has to make a commitment to it, right? Because this is greatly impacting the game, the flow of the game, the entertainment factor. When fans are complaining, not necessarily about the outcome of the flag, but that the game is greatly slowed down. There's too many of them. Morley mentioned the NFL. It's extremely rare that an NFL team will have double-digit penalties in a game. Like, extremely rare, and I'm not kidding with that. But with the CFL, for some reason, it's commonplace to have 10, 11, 13, 14 penalties for over 100 yards. We've seen many Ticats games this season where both teams have had double-digit penalties and triple-digit in terms of yardage. And I'm speaking from ignorance here, but in terms of the evaluation process, I know, after the season or leading up to the season, there's, a meeting, a series of meetings, whether it's Zoom calls or in person, where officials will get together, discuss, certain plays and how they would have called it different. That evaluation process is certainly there, but is that happening on a week-to-week basis in the Canadian Football League? I'm not sure. It happens for teams and players and coaches. For officials, I'm not 100% sure. And if it's not, maybe that's something to look at.
Yeah, we talked about how important the officials are and what kind of a role they play in the game and how they can change the outcome of the game sometimes. They're the only guys in the field who aren't full-time employees. It doesn't make sense.
And they do get evaluated, guys, on a weekly basis. And so they will I've talked to Darren Hackwood about this, the head of officiating, and they will actually be scored. So if they have a bad game, they can actually lose the next assignment the next week if it's 2 bad games in a row or whatever the threshold is. But they are evaluated every week, and they are sent videos of every single call that they've made and some that they've missed. Again, the coaches are responsible here too, because the coaches are sending video of missed penalties. I talk to every coach in these Zooms every week going, please do not send the league copies of missed penalties. We don't need any more. And to Rick's point about the NFL, I watch it very closely all the time for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is officiating, and the speed by which they call a penalty, night and day faster than we're getting it done. That can improve. We can improve in a big, big way. And there'll be times 4 penalties between both teams all game long. And if you watch the O-line, just focus on the O-line, they're committing a certain level of foul every play in the NFL. They're not throwing flags for all of those. That's the difference. And we've got to get to that.
Well, I could say that in kind of to turn that around, it looks like to me, and I feel like I'm maybe being a little picky here, but that waggle, like there's guys that, in my opinion, that are sometimes 4 and 5 yards offside, and I feel like to get away with it, Rick.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, do we want that called every time? What if the ball's not going to that particular player, or that particular player is not on the half of the field where the ball is thrown to and the play is made, and not necessarily downfield blocking? So do we have to throw the flag? that's a pretty bang call. I think we've seen, and many times at every stadium in this league, that particular play not being flagged, and sometimes I'm okay with it. If there's an infraction that leads to points, and that infraction is not called, okay, now we have an issue. But if it's a hold on the line or something's happened that is very far from the play, I'm not necessarily sure it should always be called. But at the end of the day, when that official's on the field and he has a responsibility in terms of whether he's looking at the line or the DBs or the receivers, whatever the case is, or on the line of scrimmage, they're supremely focused on what is happening on that play. So to wait and not throw the flag to maybe make sure the play is not impacted in terms of points is very difficult. So they got to find a place. There's never going to be a perfect, scenario in which the flag is thrown or not. But at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that this scenario has to get a lot better.
Glenn, from a TV standpoint, I mean, I don't know how much TSN has to say with this. I mean, you could just help us out here with this. They want to put together a good product. And is that something that the TSN or even the broadcasters have to say to, the Canadian Football League that we need this improved?
Yeah, and I think we are working behind the scenes at making it more efficient, and because with replay as well, we're completely tied into that. So the coaches need to see replays as quickly as they possibly can to decide whether or not they want to challenge a certain play, and so that we're kind of working together to try and make sure that happens quickly. But when you see what the frustrating part for me in a lot of ways, and the entertainment angle, is when you see an Andre Proulx, for instance, standing in the middle of the field, coming out of a commercial break where we've given them now 3 minutes to get this straight. And now we throw to them, basically we're saying Andre's mic is open. He can make the announcement, go. And then Andre takes another minute to walk to center field, and we're watching him, and we're waiting and we're waiting. And that 30 seconds feels like 5 minutes when you're trying to entertain and keep a crowd engaged in a football game. So that has got to be improved upon. I mean, you notice when the flag comes out in the National Football League, the ref is making the announcement almost 5, 6, 10 seconds later. The game barely even is disrupted. They move the ball without us watching them move the ball, and we start again. And you're just talking about the quarterback right away. So it's Darren Hackwood does a fantastic job, and he's open to discussions all the time. And guys, if you ever want to just email him and talk to him about anything that they do, he's always great. And we're working together trying to make it better. But more resources. They need more resources, more competition, and just a different philosophical approach, I think.
Guys in the stripes, we love you.
Yes.
we hate you. We do. I mean, actually, maybe hate's a strong word, but we get angry with you, but we love you very much, and certainly all the work that you put together to make our great game even greater. So let's come together on this. Hey, guys, thank you so much for coming together. Glen Suitor, Rick Zamperin, Morley Scott, fantastic insight and opinion, and it's certainly what we want on the CFL this week. Rick Zamperin, where do we find you if our lovely fan base want to chat with you?
Hey, go to Twitter at Rick Zamperin. You can check me out online. Just Google Good Morning Hamilton on 900 CHML, weekday mornings, 5:30 to 9, talking Hamilton news, sports, and everything in between.
Morley?
You can find me on the socials at Morley_Scott. And if you want to listen to 630 Ched, it's on the internet. Do sports there all morning long, and the Elks games as well. 3, maybe more left. Probably 3, but yeah, that's where we say.
Hey, Morley, it's funny because you know what? I've utilized that internet to listen to games all around the league this morning. You do a great job. So keep it up, and hey, let's look forward to the Elks being a much better club. Glenn,
thank you.
Where do we find you?
Yeah, I'll be in Hamilton. Very few times throughout the season I get a regular season game all the way out east, but I will be in Hamilton for the Sask Ticat game. Can't wait. Game of the week, super important for both teams, and then Winnipeg on the way back, Edmonton and Winnipeg. So that'll be my second game of the weekend.
Well, see if you can come join us and visit our little Ticats setup on the Ticats Audio Network. We'd really appreciate it. It's great to see you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
folks.
Bubba.
Hey, folks, again, we're here every Monday for you to talk to the CFL, the most controversial, up-to-date topics. It is the CFL This Week, of course, the name of the title of the show. You can find us on the internet, certainly on YouTube. Like, subscribe, keep following on all the socials as well. And, of course, if you're looking towards more the podcast way, we're on all the podcast catchers. So you certainly have a check-in. And if you've just joined us for the first time, why don't you hang on for a little bit? Anyway, this has been the CFL This Week. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil, and it's always available on the Ticats Audio Network.
The CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil. Subscribe, like, and get the deepest takes on Canada's game every Monday.